You're listening to Through the Dark Woods podcast, and I'm your host, Josea Crossley. If you're looking for support to work with your own grief or training in how to support others through grief and trauma, or would like to find out more about our amazing online community, check out darkwoodsofgrief.com. Hey, everybody, and welcome to the podcast. So today is a special holiday episode on grieving through the holidays. And I wanted to make this episode for you because I think that this is something that we just aren't talking about enough. And it's so big. It's so big to recognize that this holiday time is a time when our grief can feel like an even heavier burden than it does on an ordinary day. And there's a lot of different reasons for that, but I think one of the biggest reasons is because there's all this pressure around the holidays to be joyous and be merry, and it's supposed to be this celebratory, fun, connective time, or so the kind of colonial model tells us that we're supposed to be really shopping and preparing for this big important day that is Christmas, where we give each other all this stuff and it's supposed to be joyous, right? And so I'm going to talk more about that model of colonization and how it actually really goes against the natural rhythm of the body and the psyche at this time of year. But I want to just make a couple of announcements before we get too far. And the first one is that we will be offering in just a couple days on December 21st a 2-hour long winter solstice ritual, releasing ritual online. And we're doing this as a part of our Through the Dark Woods membership community, but we're opening it up to our larger community. And so if you're listening to this, you are invited to join us. And the intention is really honoring that at this time of winter solstice and the holiday season, the energies of the earth are actually really inviting us into a time of inward reflection, dreaming, and this last release downward, towards the earth, towards the soil, towards this composting time, right? All the leaves of the trees are not just fallen at this point, but they're actually starting to compost and be digested by the earth and the creatures that live in the soil it's becoming earth, it's becoming this rich, loamy compost. Our psyches follow these cycles of nature. And so it's this very natural time to actually turn inward and be kind of composting and letting go of patterns and ways of being, habits, things that aren't serving us anymore. It's really potent time to release in order to make space for what is coming in the spring, in the new year. And so this ritual is a really powerful way of connecting your actions to your inner desires and intention, creating physical action to connect and to, make an offering to our inner desire and our intention. And so as you go through the steps in the practice that I'm going to be offering you to do as the ritual, you're actually holding this intention and space for the transformation that you're desiring to experience, for the letting go that you're ready to experience. And it's really powerful to be doing that and to be witnessed in community. And I want to invite you to that. The cost is $37. And so that's email is info@darkwoodsofgrief.com. And I would love to see you there. So there's that. And then also in January, we're going to be opening up the group again in mid-January at the membership community. And we're going to be offering 2 intro sessions to the group for you to come in and really start to understand more about the perspective that I hold and that we hold as a community on grief and grieving, and learn some of the somatic-based skills that we use in the group, and feel into if it's the right fit for you to be held in this type of community. A lot happens in that community that is very very generative, very beautiful, very powerful healing and transformation. And it's not a getting rid of our grief, right? It's not a getting through it or getting past it or getting over it. It's not that. It's that when we can come into community and actually really be together in our grieving, there's this, similar to what I was talking about with this solstice time. It's like there's this kind of natural transformation, this natural like composting of the energy that happens that then starts to actually bear fruit. There is something that happens when we work with our grief in this way, in these ways that I teach and that we teach in these groups in this community. There's something that happens where the grief is like compost, it is like food, it is like and it can be actually transformed into a medicine. And I mean, ultimately, it's not for us, right? It's actually for our children, for our communities, for the ones who then we encounter, who we have of this medicine that we've made for ourselves and that has helped heal us, but that we can now offer it to others as well. And, everybody experiences grief if you're human, even non-human beings, wolves and bears and horses and other creatures actually definitely experience grief too. So it's maybe a mammalian thing, but we all experience grief. And it can seem like, when we look out in the world, especially if we're looking at social media, we see everyone's kind of like highlight reel of their life and even passing people in the grocery store and interacting on the superficial level in our communities, it can seem like other people are doing great, doing maybe better than us, doing fine. But when we really get down to it, what I find is that almost everyone that we meet has grief in some form or another. And a lot of times people are not aware of it and haven't touched into it, which is also why a lot of people aren't great at like holding space for our grief when we experience a major loss and are then like in that place of deep suffering. If people haven't done their own work and learned how to hold their own grief, then they certainly are not going to be capable of holding it for us. And so that is often the case, that people are not even aware that they have grief or, unprocessed trauma in their being. But if you're a human on the planet at this time, like just especially with what's happening in the world, the increasing amount of suffering every day right now. Yeah, everybody has grief on some level. And so when we can really grok that and like understand it and be with that, and especially be with that with the support of a community of people who are understanding that together and being together and allowing it to be the work that actually feeds their soul, there's something really beautiful and generative and life-changing that comes out of that. So so that's all I'm going to say about that for now, but really want to invite you to check out the Winter Solstice Grief and Gratitude Releasing Ritual. It's happening just in a couple days. And if you missed that, and even if you do make it to that, I also want to invite you to it's called No Way But Through, the sessions that are happening in January. And if you're not on my newsletter yet, definitely get on my newsletter. Go to darkwoodsofgrief.com and you can sign up on that page. And if you're on that newsletter, then you will be getting emails about both of these events. And if you want to just find out directly about the events, just shoot me an email, info@darkwoodsofgrief.com, and I will send you information. So, all right. So we're going to get into the heart of what I want to share with you today now. So I want to start us off with a poem by one of my favorite poets, Mary Oliver. Look, the trees are turning their own bodies into pillars of light, are giving off the rich fragrance of cinnamon and fulfillment. The long tapers of cattails are bursting and floating away over the blue shoulders of the ponds. And every pond, no matter what its name is nameless now. Every year, everything I have learned in my lifetime leads back to this. The fires and the black river of loss, whose other side is salvation, whose meaning none of us will ever know. To live in this world, you must be able to do three things: to love what is mortal, to hold it against your bones, knowing your own life depends on it. And when the time comes to let it go, to let it go. So this, Mary Oliver in the Blackwater Woods poem, I think so deeply articulates what is being asked of us in this season. And unfortunately, we live in a death phobic and a grief phobic culture. And so when we're coming to the bottom of the valley of the year, winter solstice time, unfortunately, this colonized way of doing things of, rushing and pressure and, find the right thing and make sure it's perfect. And it's a lot. It's a lot. So there's this busyness, and this pressure to, be doing all these things and accomplishing all these things still, still even in this darkest, what's supposed to be, according to nature, if we're following nature, slowest, deepest time of year where there should be rest and rejuvenation happening and a going underground happening in our being, in our psyche. When this should be happening, there's actually this increase that's perpetuated by the colonial culture of busyness and rush and hurry and strive and buy and consume and this energy. But there's also then this added layer of the dynamic of what we're missing in terms of family and community. And I want to share with you a story of something I recently experienced. I have a friend who her family is from Gaza, and she's been sending us updates from her family who's there, and we've particularly been following her cousins who have three children, and they're a couple, Mahmoud and Fazia, and their three beautiful children, Mohammed, Maria, and Ahmed, who's 7 years old, and sends us videos when they have access to internet. And actually, we haven't heard from them for many days, and so my heart is breaking around the possibility that they may not be alive still because of what is happening there. But I had a huge realization because I was suggesting to them, they were saying, yeah, we may have to give up and try to get to Egypt. And I said, yeah, like my intuition is saying that's good to go, to survive, to get out of there. And I want to share this story with you because it really relates to what we've lost in the West in terms of family and community. Because a few days later, my friend sent us, she said, oh, the cousins, they're all, living at the UN center in South Gaza now, and, just outside. It was barely no food and water, or very hard access to food and water. But she said, oh, one of the cousins got the family together to take a photo to send us. And she sent us this photo, and this photo has there's 30 people in this photo. And it just blew me away because I realized that the idea of family that we have in the West is so much different than what family was and is in the old world, in Palestine, in many of the countries where, people have lived for a long time, where my ancestors come from, also in indigenous communities here in Turtle Island. The extended family is huge, right? The extended family is community. And she also told me, my friend, she said that there was a few years ago, her and her husband were trying to adopt a child from Palestine because it would have meant a lot for them to be able to adopt a child of, an orphan, of someone who, people are being killed there all the time by the Israeli army. And I mean, of course, people die of natural causes too. And so there's orphans. But what they found is that they could not adopt a child from Palestine because always, always, always when a child becomes orphaned, they get taken in by the family that is there, by the extended family, and if not the extended family, by the friends, the community, because their idea of family there is so strong that nobody is ever alone, nobody is ever orphaned. There's always somebody to take them in. And I mean, for one thing, how devastating that culture and that those families and those communities are being destroyed right now. But for the purpose of our this podcast, this understanding that like in the West, because we're so our families have become so much smaller and more like the nuclear family is what we're familiar with here. We've lost that sense of big extended family for the most part. I do know people who have it to some degree, but it means that when our family becomes so small and when we have no community, we have no village. When we lose the people closest to us, then we have nobody. And there's so many people, probably many of you who are listening out there today, who are in that situation where you have nobody. And so we need to recognize that when we're in a time, a holiday time, that I think this time of year, Christmas, solstice, this season, Hanukkah, all the different Diwali, all the different, traditions that happen this time of year are based around family and community. Those are family and community traditions. And when we don't have family and community, and we're faced with all of these traditions and celebrations and, many people coming together in that way, it brings us into what Francis Weller calls what we expected and did not receive, the third gate of grief. It brings us deeply into that gate of grief and that feeling of aloneness and isolation. And if on top of that, we're also grieving a major loss, then it can be just unbearable to be trying to navigate this time. This is a really, really big problem, this sense of isolation that we can feel in this society today that is perpetuated by the society of individualism, me and mine. And so a lot of people end up really, really lonely at this time of year. And that is compounded by the fact that this is the season when our grief and can come the most forward, right? Because of the darker days, because of the descent into the winter energy. I think that it's really important to first recognize that that's the context that we're living in, is this context of separation culture, individuality culture, me, mine, this colonial culture and so this sense of lack of support, of loneliness, of aloneness is there. And so it's really important that if we're experiencing isolation in that way, that, we recognize where that's coming from, right? Like it's not your fault if you're feeling that way. And if that's your experience, it is a cultural, a societal issue. And that said, there is also both, right? There is also a place where if we want that to shift, we have to take responsibility for our situation, our individual situation, and do what we can to remedy that problem, which is the problem of isolation and aloneness. And so, looking for community, looking for places where you can come in and be a part of connection, be held. And I will say that, those spaces are hard to find, which is why I do what I do, why I offer, community for people to come into and be with their grief, because I think those places are really hard to find. And ideally we would all have them in our own, close to our own home where we could go and be in person in those places. But the reality is that that's not the case oftentimes. Yeah. So just to recognize that it is a need. And so, yeah, just to, normalize the experience and also, offer, some medicine for it. The next thing I want to talk about is depression and grief. and differentiating between the two. So we're going to differentiate between the two, and then we're going to talk about how we can support both of those. Martin Pachtel says depression is not grief. He says depression is stuck grief. It's not moving. It's not the energy moving and grieving. It's stuck, right? It's unprocessed, stuck grief. And so the two are not the same thing. And I think it's really important to recognize that when we don't have the support and the tools and the skills of how to work with our grief, it can very easily become stuck grief and become depression, right? And ask me how I know. When I was a young person, 19, I went through a year of some very, very severe clinical depression. I know for sure now that it was related. It was chemically related to birth control pills that I was taking at the time, and birth control pills are widely known to have the side effect of chemical depression in the brain. And so once I got off of those pills, I improved a lot. I shouldn't say I improved a lot. That makes it sound like it's like getting out of depression is self-improvement, but my brain stayed balanced out basically. And I was able to start to move the energy in a better way. When I was on those pills, it was practically impossible to, even though I had quite a few tools at that point already in my healing toolkit, it was just such a chemical state. And I do know that this can happen to people. We develop neural pathways when we spend too much time isolated in our grief. Those neural pathways get developed that can actually lead us into that stuckness and into that deep chemical depression. And so it can take a lot of work and a lot of support to get us out of that. And sometimes I think there is a place for medication, antidepressant medication to help get those neural pathways moving in a different direction. That said, I think we can really easily, if we don't address the root cause, get stuck on medication and get stuck in like a state where we're actually not feeling, it's just like a plateau, right? And kind of a sense of flatness. And when we start to be able to actually move that energy and touch into our grief and allow it to move, then we start to have a more full range of emotions, not just deep sorrow or rage or, those hard feelings, but we also get more access to joy and connection. And so that's one of the reasons why this work is really, really important, because yes, we can help ourselves and be helped to some degree, I think, with medication, with nutrition, these type of things, but we ultimately need to address the root cause. And so, yeah, I want to talk a little bit about, though, what are some things other than medication that we can use to help start getting that energy moving and those neural pathways shifting. Because I think that if you do experience depression and you're in the Northern Hemisphere, these dark days of winter, and especially the solstice time, and especially compounded with the layers of holidays and, you're supposed to feel joyful and great, can really, really, really compound the energy and feelings of depression. And I hear from a lot of people who are experiencing suicidal thoughts this time of year because of that. So I know that it can be really, really painful. And particularly also if you've had a major loss in the last year or few years, it can be a really, really hard time. And so some of these things that I'm going to share are helpful, I think, both for grieving as well as for starting to move that energy of depression. And one more thing, actually, I want to say about depression is that when it gets to, depression is really when we look at it in terms of nervous system, it's really related to the freeze response and to a shutting down, a hypo active nervous system. So it's like an underactive nervous system. We're too low, right? And so one of the reasons for, especially if if we start to experience suicidal thoughts or suicidal ideation, something that I think is really helpful for people to know and understand is that when we have a traumatic experience, one of the responses is freeze and shut down, right? And that freeze shut down response, it's like the way that possums play dead, right? When they think they're going to be eaten, right? And so it's literally our animal nervous system is like shutting down, and all these analgesic, painkiller neurochemicals start to run through the nervous system, and that is protective of our being, so that if we literally are going to be killed or eaten, that we don't feel the pain of that as intensely, right? So it's like our body is preparing for death when we start to touch into that freeze response, right? And so when we touch that freeze response later in our lives, if we haven't moved that trauma energy through and come out of that freeze response, part of our nervous system can be stuck in that freeze. And then when we touch that freeze energy in our nervous system, even if it's in a healing way, like we're starting to touch it and we're starting to like move it a little bit, it's very normal to start to feel suicidal thoughts, because we're touching an energy that was preparing for death. So it's literally like our body, mind, spirit had prepared for death. And when we touch that, our body, mind, spirit is like, oh yeah, I'm ready to die, right? And so if we can touch that place with awareness of recognizing, like when we have those thoughts, right? Like, maybe I should die, maybe I want to die, how could I die? Creating all the ways that actually, those thoughts actually may be coming from an energy that's just trying to move, that's trying to come out of that freeze response. Right. And so when we know that, then we can start to go like, oh, okay, that thought means that I need to actually like help my body come out of freeze. Ways that we can help our body come out of freeze: wiggling the fingers and toes. Okay. Wiggling the fingers and toes, getting the body moving, even if it's that subtle, putting on some music and just starting to move the body, even a little bit, even if you like can't get out of bed, put on music and like wiggle the fingers and toes, move the body. See if you can let the music move the body. Keep recognizing, what's happening in the body, right? Which is that freeze response. See it, witness it, and invite it to start to move, right? And I do really recommend getting support with this. Like, this is definitely, if you're working with the energy on that level, working with a somatic therapist, working with someone who can actually like help you move through that is really, really good, because a lot of times we think like, oh, well, I should, if I have these tools, if I have this understanding, I should be able to do it on my own. But that is the colonial mindset again coming through, or this idea of individuality, that we should be able to like be strong and do things by ourselves. We're not meant to move through this kind of energy, this kind of trauma, this kind of healing by ourselves. We're actually meant to be in a whole group of people, a whole community, a whole bunch of support, right? So like, it's almost like the minimum is getting one other person there to help and support you. And I think one-on-one therapy can be really, really helpful in this way. Being in ritual, being in community space, is probably the best medicine for it. But sometimes doing one-on-one therapy for a period of time before coming into a ritual space is actually helpful, because we build the capacity of our nervous system then to be able to come into the stronger energy of the ritual space. So, so recognizing that freeze response, that shutdown, that depression is probably coming from unprocessed grief and trauma, right? This is major, major important. Now, other ways of getting that energy moving, right? Because grief energy needs to move. It needs to move. And so other ways are starting to learn to feel our body, right? So gaining somatic skills, which, these are things that I do teach in the Through the Dark Woods online community, and skills you can also get by working with a somatic therapist. So gaining those somatic skills, learning how to feel the body, because grief lives in our body and we need to move it through the body, right? Okay. I talked about wiggling the fingers and toes, maybe using music to get the body moving is really, really helpful. Learning to feel the body and get the energy moving in the body. And I'm going to name a bunch of things, and like these things, not everything is going to work for everybody, right? Like even if you can choose one or two of these tools and get them working for you, that's great, because not everything is going to work for everybody. And what's going to work for one person is not going to work for another person, and vice versa, right? So that's why I'm going to try to give you a variety of tools. So meditation can be really, really helpful for some people. And I want to explain what I mean when I say meditation, because a lot of people think that meditating is like having no thoughts in your mind and or like focusing on something and keeping that focus. And the way that I teach meditation comes from my teacher, Elizabeth Clare Burr, and the lineage of Mingyur Rinpoche, incredible Tibetan teacher who has spent a lot of time in the West and brought his teachings here. So the way that we teach is actually open awareness, or non-meditation. And it's really building the witness part of ourselves, right? So we sit, and if we have a thought, if we catch ourselves thinking, if we catch ourselves thoughts spiraling way down the thought spiral, we just bring it back, right? And we notice and we bring it back. We notice and we bring it back. And the awareness is noticing what's happening in the body, noticing what's happening around us in the space, noticing sound, noticing, just noticing, observing, witnessing, right? So really building that inner witness. And I think that this can be really, really helpful practice. And again, this is something that we teach in the Through the Dark Woods membership community. Elizabeth actually teaches in that community on Monday evenings. Another really powerful practice is cold water immersion. And again, this is not going to work for everybody. Some people are going to be like, I cannot do that. But, I was sharing with one of my students the other day whose friend is struggling with feeling suicidal. Cold water immersion is cool. No pun intended. But it's really cool because it actually kind of feels like self-harm. So if you're like really in that place where you're like, yeah, I want to experience, I want to harm myself, like I want to die, getting in the cold water actually feels a bit like that. It's like, it can feel like death. It can feel like self-harm. And the magic of it is that getting in the cold water and staying there for 1 to 2 minutes actually produces more dopamine in the brain than snorting cocaine, and it lasts for like way longer. So this is a really natural, really purifying, healing way of actually giving your brain more dopamine, while also, kind of feeding that part of yourself that is like, oh, I want to feel something intense, right? So I think it helps us get into our bodies also. So cold water immersion. And if you have the facilities alternating cold water immersion with sauna is really amazing. So highly recommend that. Yeah. And I think getting in wild water is ideal, but definitely if you have a cold water pool, or just, turning your shower to cold, back and forth from cold to hot in the shower in the morning, or, throughout the day can be really great, as well. Definitely better than nothing. So, yeah. And then the last thing that I want to mention, and of course there's so many more tools, but this is just trying to give you a few for today, is unplugging from the internet, unplugging from Facebook, unplugging from Instagram, definitely not doom scrolling, right? That doom scrolling it's proven actually to create depression and to create suicidal thoughts when we do it too much. It's not good for the brain. It's not good for the spirit. And actually, Ryan Gordon, I saw a beautiful piece that she had written a couple days ago about actually sometimes we actually need to not just step away from it and maybe like delete those apps from our phone, which are good things to do if you're finding yourself doom scrolling a lot, but actually cutting cords from Instagram, cutting cords from Facebook, cutting cords from, Netflix or whatever it is. And literally you can just go through the body and, pretend that your hand is like a knife or scissors, and you literally like cut cords, feel into where they are and cut them. And if you're struggling to do this, then, get support. This is something that I offer. This is something Ran offers. And yeah, shamanic cord cutting, very, very powerful process and a good thing to learn to know how to do so that you can do it multiple times a day if you're struggling with an addiction like this, really an addiction to anything, not just social media or the internet, but anything. We can cut cords and clear. And yeah, getting in cold water is actually a beautiful and powerful way to cut cords as well. So yeah. Okay, so I think those are the main things I wanted to talk about in regards to depression and grief. And now I want to actually read you this beautiful piece that relationship enhancement specialist Shinuka Mayoshi Smith wrote. She calls this holiday host etiquette. So this is I think this is really, I'm just going to frame it a little bit more before I read it. I think this is really good to understand if you're somebody who is holding other people, who has other people in your lives who have experienced major loss recently, or who are, struggling with depression, or, have experienced major loss not so recently, but are still struggling with it, because that certainly can be the case as well. And it's also good to know as a griever, someone who's grieving, because when we are really clear about what we need, then sometimes it can help us to actually be able to articulate it and ask for what we need, which is a really important skill when you're grieving, to be able to ask really clearly from the people around you for what you need, because most cases people are not naturally great at, or I shouldn't say naturally, but we just don't learn these skills, right? So holiday host etiquette. If you're inviting someone to your home and they're grieving, be sure you're inviting their grief to attend to. It will be there anyway. Don't invite someone with the goal of cheering them up for the holidays. Don't expect them to put on a happy face in your home. Don't demand they fake it until they make it or do something they don't want to do either. Inviting them with the loving intention of offering cheer and companionship and unconditional care during the holidays. To do this, you'll need to honor and be responsive to their needs and emotions. You can do this by privately acknowledging their grief when you make the invitation. I know this season is extra hard and your heart is hurting. You and your grief are welcome in our home. Come as you are. We'd be honored to have you with us. It's also incredibly loving to honor the reality that it's often hard for grieving folks to know what they will want, need, be up for, or be able to tolerate at the holidays. So giving them an invite without the need for commitment and permission to change their mind is extra loving. You don't have to decide right now. You could say, if it feels good to be with us, we have plenty of food and love for you. Just show up. I'll check in again the day before to see if you're feeling up to coming over, and if there's anything you'd like me to know about how we can support you. Your grieving friends and fam need attentive care and responsiveness at the holidays, not plans to keep them busy, distracted, and happy. If they're laughing, laugh with them. If they're weeping, ask if they'd like your company or your help finding a quiet place to snuggle up alone for a while. If they're laughing while weeping, this is more common than you'd think. Stay with them. This is a precious moment of the human experience that is truly sacred. We don't need to protect ourselves or each other from grief at the holidays. In fact, the more we embrace grief as an honored holiday guest, the more healthy, happy, and whole our holidays will be. That is so beautiful. And again, that's Shaniqua Mayoshi Smith. And I want to read another piece from my friend Dawn Dancing Otter, because I think this, claiming this, what she says here, claiming this for ourselves at this time through the holidays is so, so important. So she says, you do not need to audition your grief. You do not have to find an equally joyful statement to sweeten the astringency of I'm sad, or I'm hurting, or I feel lost. You are not required to provide digestive enzymes for others to metabolize your lived experience. You are not tasked with saving others from the discomfort or perceived inconvenience that they experience in witnessing your authentic feelings. It is a gift you bring to take space, to look back on where you've walked, to tell those stories. It is a privilege for others to listen to you sharing your truth. So again, that's Dawn Dancing Otter. And yeah, I think this is so important to own this for ourselves, because when we can own it for ourselves, we can also give other people permission to not try to fix us, right? And often that is what we need to do in this society, unfortunately, especially when dealing with, family and friends that may not have the understanding of grief that we have. So often we may need to say like, hey, I actually just need to express exactly where I'm at, be with what it is. I don't need you to fix me or help me or try to cheer me up, right? If we can just ask for that and invite other people to hold us in that way, sometimes that's all the permission that they need to be able to just be with us. And we will also learn through this process of asking for what we need and, being in our grief, we will also learn who is around us that can do that, right? I mean, so many times I hear that when we experience a major loss, when someone experiences a major loss, the people in their lives like just disappear, right? The people who they thought were their friends, who they thought were there for them, are not able to tolerate it, are not able to hold it, to handle it, right? And so I think that can also inhibit us from expressing our grief. But wouldn't you rather be authentic and find out who can show up for you authentically than suppress your authentic experience, right? And sometimes we have to have a complete transformation and renewal in our friend groups, in who is around us when we go through an initiation, like a major loss in our lives, because it does bring us into a reckoning with authenticity and with who can handle authenticity. And so don't make yourself wrong if you're surrounded by people who don't seem to be able to handle your experience, right? Don't make yourself wrong. Instead, recognize that it's probably their stuff that's, their own unprocessed grief that's getting in the way, that they haven't worked with, and find people who can hold your experience, right? Because your experience is so worthy of being held, of being heard, of being seen, of being witnessed, of being with. And it's only through being witnessed and being held and being seen that we develop the capacity, that we broaden our capacity to be able to be with our own experience, right? So we do need people, and there is people out there who can be with your experience. So I really, really want to invite that. And if you are struggling to find people around you who can hold you through your experience, then definitely come and check out our Through the Dark Woods community. Definitely consider coming and joining us for our winter solstice ritual. I would love to see you there and hear your story and get to know you a little bit more and support you with these skills, with these tools, and just with the space to come where everything's welcome. So I think that's all that I'm going to share for today. I hope that some of what I've shared has been helpful, and wishing you a really beautiful, blessed holiday season, solstice season. This dark time can be a beautiful time. The darkness does not have to be a time and a place that we fear. There's so much richness that comes from being in the dark. It's the dark soil that seeds begin their growth within. Yeah. I'm going to leave you today with a poem, a piece of writing by Bridget Anna McNeil. She says, "In the dark and invisible world, life thrums. deep under the earth, the seeds, covered and fed by all that has been let go of, all that has been given up in offering, are held, forming, rooting, opening, and shaping. Within the blackened, transformant matter, life begins. In the death of the old, medicine is born. All beginnings start in the darkness, in the fecund earth, in the pulsing womb. It is not spring where life suddenly appears out of nowhere, but now in these inward months. Spring is not a savior of winter days. It is birthed from winter, born because of winter. And it is this winter story that teaches me much about my own human journey. All right, blessings. I hope to see you at our winter solstice releasing ritual. And may the dark nourish you, body, mind, spirit, and soul. May you rest and be blessed by the rest of this season, by the calling down the gravity that pulls us towards the earth, the darkness in the night, in these long nights that nourishes our dreams and brings us into a place of readiness for what will come when the sun rises. This has been Through the Dark Woods podcast. I'm your host, Josea Tamira Crossley, and thanks for listening today. If you are looking for support to process your own grief or would like to learn more about trainings to support others, check out darkwoodsofgrief.com.